The night was dazzlingly illuminated at Alfredo's mansion, a monument to wealth and extravagance. The party, organized for the city's elite, buzzed with an atmosphere of excess, where champagne flowed freely and laughter echoed through the grand hall. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a golden light over tables adorned with elegant arrangements of exotic flowers. Everything about the scene screamed luxury, yet at the same time, there was a superficiality that lingered in the air. It was the kind of event where appearances mattered more than any conversation. Alfredo, the host of the evening, moved among the guests, radiating an air of arrogance. He was a man who thrived on flaunting his power and wealth, never missing an opportunity to show who was in control. His friends, all part of the same high society, shared the same attitude, and amid jokes and frivolous comments, a plan began to form in Alfredo's mind. He had spotted João, the elderly pianist who was there solely to provide his services. João was a quiet figure, dressed in simple clothes worn down by time. He seemed out of place in such an extravagant setting, but he carried a quiet dignity that sharply contrasted with the pomp of the guests. His fingers, though aged, moved lightly across the piano keys, but few noticed. To Alfredo, however, João represented a unique opportunity to entertain his friends in a cruel way. "Do you want to see something really fun?" Alfredo asked with a mischievous smile, catching the attention of the group around him. They all turned to him, curious. "I'll call that old man over there to play something special for us. I bet it'll be hilarious." The provocation was made, and the condescending laughter that followed confirmed that everyone was ready for the spectacle. Without wasting time, Alfredo walked over to João, making sure all eyes at the party were on him. "My dear," he said in a voice as sweet as it was sarcastic, "why don't you treat us to a performance? I'm sure something simple will be enough to impress my guests." João hesitated for a moment, Alfredo's gaze piercing his dignity. The room was now silent and the air was heavy with anticipation. As João approached the piano, his hands slightly trembling, his mind wandered to a distant time. A time when music was his only companion, and he, just a young dreamer, was known not for the poverty of his appearance but for the richness of his melodies. He had grown up in a small town where opportunities were few, but the sound of an old piano at the local church always called to him. It didn't matter if his shoes were worn or if dinner was scarce. When João sat in front of the keys, everything else faded away. The music filled the emptiness. In his youth, João had played for audiences that gave him standing ovations. These weren't luxurious parties or grand halls, but small performances in cafes and town squares where his music brought life to the surroundings. He was a genuine talent, known for the emotion he infused into every note. People used to say that when he played, it felt like the world itself stopped to listen. But time, relentless as ever, brought its cruelties. Poverty set in, opportunities grew scarce, and João found himself increasingly on the margins. Now at Alfredo's party, that past felt like a distant echo, almost forgotten. He had always played in humble settings, never seeking luxury or the approval of the elite. For João, music was always a refuge, not a tool for showing off. Yet life had hardened him. The years of struggle, the odd jobs as a musician for private events, had taught him a harsh truth. He had to keep going, even when his dignity seemed to slip away. Alfredo's invitation was a humiliation, and João knew it. He could feel it in the eyes of everyone around him, but necessity spoke louder. He needed that payment. The bills were waiting, and the choices were growing slimmer with each passing year. Swallowing his pride, João sat at the piano ready to face yet another silent battle between himself, the piano, and the cruel audience. João walked slowly toward the piano, feeling the weight of every gaze. The room, once filled with laughter, was now suffocating with tension. Everyone's attention was on him, and amidst the whispers, João clearly noticed the looks of disdain. Alfredo, with a malicious smile curling on his lips, watched every move of the old pianist like a predator stalking its prey. He had already set the stage for what he considered a humiliating spectacle. His guests, comfortably seated in their luxurious outfits, exchanged knowing glances, ready to enjoy what they saw as a moment of amusement. "Does he even remember how to play?" a woman murmured among the group, discreetly laughing behind a glass of wine. "Poor guy probably can't even move his fingers right," mocked another man, prompting stifled giggles around him. The cruel comments ricocheted through the room, but João kept his head high. Every word, every laugh, was a knife to his pride, but he knew he couldn't afford to react. He had been through humiliating situations before, but the venom in this crowd felt different. Alfredo, with arrogance written all over his face, crossed his arms and leaned back in a nearby chair, visibly satisfied. He was eagerly awaiting the moment João would make a mistake that would justify all the ridicule he had planned. João sat at the piano, his fingers hovering over the keys, feeling the familiar coldness of the ivory. His heart, which had been racing, began to slow as he connected with the instrument. Yet the words around him continued to echo, like poison in the air. "Come on, old man, surprise us," someone shouted, bolder than the others. Alfredo just smiled, crossing his legs, expecting the piano to become the stage for João's public humiliation. The room was primed for disaster, but João in silence was preparing for the unexpected. João placed his fingers on the keys with a nearly imperceptible lightness. The room, once full of laughter and whispers, fell into an uncomfortable silence. The sound of the first note echoed through the air, soft and delicate, almost shy. It was a simple note, lacking the grandeur the guests had expected. A modest touch. The murmurs momentarily ceased, and some of the guests exchanged puzzled glances. This was not the music they had anticipated. Alfredo's eyes remained fixed on João, his sneering smile still in place, but a slight furrow in his brow hinted at growing impatience. He was certain that at any moment João would stumble over a sequence of notes, fail at something ridiculous, and make everyone burst into laughter. But that didn't happen. The music, which initially seemed unassuming, began to unfold like an intimate conversation between the pianist and the piano. Each chord flowed with a melodic ease, simple yet profound. The notes intertwined in a calm cadence, almost like a whisper to everyone present. The room, once a stage for superficiality, was now enveloped in a different atmosphere. Laughter faded away, and mocking expressions gave way to curiosity. The looks of scorn were replaced by something new: surprise. With every note João played, it felt as though the entire room was breathing in sync with the music. The melody, though subtle, carried an unexpected emotional weight. It was as if the keys were revealing hidden secrets. The arrogant gleam in the guests' eyes began to dim, replaced by a reverent silence. However, Alfredo, seated with his legs crossed, remained rigid. He was waiting for something, anything that could justify his disdain. But the music continued, undisturbed, defying expectations. The soft notes that once filled the room began to shift. João's touch, once delicate and reserved, gained strength and depth. His hands, which had seemed hesitant at first, now moved with impressive agility across the keys as if they were extensions of the piano itself. The simple melody evolved into something grand, intricately woven. The room, still brimming with surprise, was now utterly mesmerized. Every sound from the piano seemed to tell a story no one there had expected to hear. The luxurious hall, once buzzing with laughter and superficial conversation, had transformed into a sanctuary for João's music. The guests, so full of themselves moments earlier, were drawn into a world of intense emotions. The music enveloped everything around, unearthing feelings that many of them hadn't even known were buried within. It was as if the piano had come to life, and João, with the mastery of a true virtuoso, was commanding it with undeniable confidence and skill. Each note, each chord, seemed to carry the weight of João's life. The struggles, the lost dreams, the love for music that had never abandoned him, even when his world was falling apart. And somehow, the guests felt it. What had begun as a performance destined for ridicule had become a transformative experience. Conversations ceased entirely, mocking glances vanished, and each person present was frozen, as if afraid to miss a single second of this unexpected revelation. Alfredo, who had initially watched with an arrogant smile, was now stiff. The air of superiority on his face was beginning to fade. Something within him was shifting, even though he was reluctant to admit it. He had never heard anything like this before. His certainty that João would fail was crumbling, along with his own sense of control. Alfredo struggled to maintain his composure, but the truth was undeniable. He was witnessing a genius. The guests, once ready to laugh and belittle, were now immersed in something far greater than anyone had anticipated. They weren't just hearing a performance, they were witnessing a moment of pure art. And, at that instant, the collective arrogance that had pervaded the hall was replaced by something rare and precious: respect. The truth was clear to everyone there. João was not just an old pianist. He was a master, and his music, a masterpiece. João's fingers danced across the piano, and each note seemed to suspend time. The air in the hall had changed completely. Where there had been laughter and mockery, there was now a silent reverence. The guests were all in awe. Some stared at João, unable to look away, while others exchanged bewildered glances as if they couldn't believe what they were witnessing. "This is unbelievable," whispered one of the women, almost to herself, as her hands, which had previously held a wine glass with elegance, now trembled slightly. Another man, who had once worn a smug smile on his face and an impeccable suit, now sat rigid, gripping the armrest of his chair tightly, clearly shaken by the intensity of the music. The initial disdain the guests had felt was replaced by deep admiration, almost reverence. They were witnessing something that surpassed even their boldest expectations. Every person in that room, even the most cynical, knew they were experiencing something rare, something they could never have predicted. And as they realized this, a shadow of embarrassment began to fall over them. What had once been intended as a spectacle of humiliation was now transforming into a display of greatness. Alfredo, sitting in his chair, his smile long gone, felt the ground give way beneath him. The humiliation he had carefully planned was now turning against him. With every note João played, Alfredo sank deeper into his own shame. His attempt to belittle the old pianist had backfired spectacularly. The looks from the guests, once complicit, now held something different. Some glanced at Alfredo with mild reproach, others with surprise, as if they were finally seeing him for who he truly was. Alfredo, the arrogant millionaire, no longer seemed grand in that room. Now he was the small and petty one. As João concluded his performance with a triumphant piece, Alfredo was caught in an internal whirlwind. The vibrant, exuberant sound filling the hall seemed to echo in his mind, reinforcing the sense of defeat he was feeling. João's music wasn't just a display of talent, it was a declaration of dignity and strength, something Alfredo had neither anticipated nor imagined. With each final chord, Alfredo's expression shifted from disdain to disbelief. The weight of his failure was crushing. He watched João, now with an admirable humility, slowly rise from the piano bench, his shoulders still straight, but his presence serene. João's music had stripped away Alfredo's superficiality and revealed a painful truth about himself. What was meant to be a moment of casual amusement at someone else's expense now confronted Alfredo with his own flaws and insecurities. The audience, once complicit in Alfredo's intent, erupted in applause. The clapping echoed through the hall, and shouts of admiration filled the space. Alfredo was frozen, his thoughts spinning around the magnitude of the mistake he had made. He saw the guests applauding not just João's talent, but the true greatness of a spirit he had tried to belittle. João gave a humble bow, his face lit with the simple joy of the moment. There was no ostentation in his gesture, just a quiet acknowledgement that the true victory lay in his art and his ability to touch people's hearts. As he prepared to leave, Alfredo felt an even heavier weight on his shoulders. The true lesson was clear. Strength wasn't found in money or status, but in integrity and the power of the soul. João, with his music and dignity, had exposed this truth in an unforgettable way. João rose from the piano bench, his movement still filled with a calm grace, as if each step was an extension of the serenity he had brought with his performance. The room was in a frenzy, the applause and shouts of admiration still ringing out, but João remained unmoved by the euphoria. Unhurried, and with his dignity intact, he began to walk toward the exit. Every step seemed to carry the weight of a quiet greatness, an unshakable resilience to any attempt to diminish him. Alfredo, standing in a corner, was still stunned, the humiliation plain on his face, while João's presence now stood in clear contrast to his own uncomfortable position. As João walked past the guests, some approached him, eager to express their admiration in words and compliments. "Mr. João, that was an incredible performance," said one of the guests, extending a hand with a sincere smile. João looked at him with a modest smile, a smile that conveyed gratitude and humility without the need for words. He nodded in acknowledgement, without stopping. His eyes sparkled with a kindness that spoke louder than any speech could. Another guest commented on the wonder of the music, but João simply greeted them with a slight nod and continued on his way. As João left the mansion, he walked with a calm resolve. The impact of his performance was still fresh in everyone's minds. Conversations began to revolve around his greatness, and Alfredo's attempt at humiliation seemed more insignificant by the moment. João needed no fanfare or explicit recognition. His exit was as graceful as his performance. The truth of his talent and dignity lingered in every corner of the room, reverberating long after he was gone. He had left an indelible mark, and in the quietness of his departure, the true triumph was clear to everyone who had witnessed that unforgettable moment. While the sound of applause still echoed through the mansion's halls, Alfredo found himself alone in a dark corner of the room. The soft light from the lamps cast long shadows, and the festive glow of the party now seemed distant and unreal. He was lost in his own thoughts, his hands still trembling slightly from the emotional impact of what he had just witnessed. The silence was almost deafening, compared to the frenzy that had followed João's departure. Alfredo gazed at the now empty stage where moments earlier João had enchanted everyone with his music. The contrast between the grandeur of the performance and the pettiness of his attempted humiliation now felt overwhelming. The arrogance that had guided him suddenly seemed like a heavy, uncomfortable mask. His friends, once complicit and admirers of his ostentation, were now distant, their expressions marked by a new understanding. Alfredo could feel it, even without hearing the whispers that now spread around him. The party, which he had planned to bask in his own glory, had become a reflection of his failure. He had been the center of attention, but for reasons entirely opposite to what he had imagined. The lesson was clear, though unspoken. The money and status Alfredo prized above all could not buy authenticity, true mastery, or genuine respect. The depth of João's talent and the dignity with which he had faced the situation were undeniable proof that some things lie beyond the reach of wealth or influence. Alfredo felt this intimately and painfully, and the weight of this realization was as profound as João's music. Reality had confronted him in an inescapable way, and he stood face to face with the truth that true worth cannot be measured in gold coins or social standing. In the days that followed that unforgettable night, the story of João's performance began to spread like wildfire. The city buzzed with whispers about the old pianist who, with unexpected talent, had turned a high society party into a stage for true greatness. News of the event traveled quickly, crossing social circles and even reaching the media. João was invited to perform at other events, and each invitation seemed like confirmation that his art had finally received the recognition it deserved. As João accepted new invitations and opportunities, the transformation in his life was tangible. His reputation as an exceptional pianist was restored, and he was now admired not only for his talent, but also for the dignity and humility he embodied. Events and concerts became a new routine, but João approached each performance with the same passion and dedication he had shown at Alfredo's party. Despite the growing recognition, João continued his life with the same simplicity as always. He still lived in his small house and maintained his modest habits. The difference now was the renewed confidence that shone in his eyes. He knew that, even when underestimated, his talent had been a powerful force, strong enough to change perceptions and win hearts. Every note played, every round of applause received, was a reminder that true greatness doesn't lie in status or wealth, but in the authenticity and passion with which one lives their art. As he reflected on his impact, João felt a deep peace. The recognition he had long sought, often overshadowed by challenges and hardships, had finally arrived. And with that, he continued to play, not to prove himself to others, but to celebrate the music and the truth of his own spirit. What would you do if you were in João's shoes, realizing you were there to be humiliated? Would you keep playing as usual, or would you have gotten up and left? Comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any stories like this one.